I am Claire Mitchell, 32 years old, and I thought the first morning of the new year would be about fresh starts and family. I had baked cinnamon rolls before dawn, set the table with my grandmother's old china, and believed that for once we would sit together in peace. But as I poured coffee into polished cups, my mother pressed a silver-wrapped box into my hands. My father looked away, my brother stayed silent, and my sister's eyes glittered like she knew a secret. Inside that box was not a gift, but a paper that turned my world upside down. My own family had chosen to erase me from the home I had built with my bare hands. My sister laughed, certain she had won, certain I would break. But instead of tears, something else rose in me, something sharper. What would you do if the people you loved most handed you betrayal on the very first day of the year? Stay with me, because what began that morning became a battle none of them expected. Let me take you back to where it began. New Year's morning in Columbus had that sharp winter air that cut straight through the seams of your coat, no matter how tightly you pulled it closed. I was standing at the old pine counter of my kitchen, still warm from the oven that had been running since dawn. The smell of cinnamon rolls and fresh coffee floated into the living room where my parents and siblings had gathered. It was supposed to be a gentle start to the year, a moment of peace after the chaos of the holidays. I had put hours into preparing it, setting the table with my grandmother's faded china, polishing the silver that had belonged to my dad's parents. The house on Willow Street wasn't just where I lived. For 5 years it had been my entire project, my anchor. I had scraped away mold from the basement, replaced every window frame, sanded the floors until they glowed. I had planted lavender along the front walkway, and every summer the purple bloom seemed to nod at me like they knew how hard I had worked. This house was mine, at least in my heart. My mother, Linda, sat on the couch, her hair pinned neatly, as always holding a box wrapped in shiny silver paper with a red ribbon tied in a perfect bow. She smiled at me with a brightness that felt forced, her hands trembling just slightly. My father, Richard, was beside her, his broad shoulders hunched, as if he wanted to disappear into the cushions. Anna, my younger sister, perched on the arm of the chair with a grin that had nothing soft about it. Ethan, my older brother, sat quietly near the window, eyes lowered, sipping coffee, as if he wanted to stay out of whatever storm was brewing. "Claire, honey, open this first," Mom said, holding out the box. "It's special." I wiped my hands on a towel and took it, smiling automatically. My heart softened for a moment. Maybe after all the strain of the past year, this was their way of saying they saw me, that they appreciated me. I tugged at the ribbon, peeled away the shiny paper, and slid the envelope from inside. The moment my eyes caught the bold letters across the top, the warmth of the room seemed to drain out. Eviction notice. My hand froze, my stomach twisting hard. I read again, praying I had seen wrong. Eviction notice effective 45 days. "What is this?" I whispered, my voice unrecognizable. My father looked down at the rug. My mother blinked too quickly, as if dust had gotten into her eyes. No one answered right away. Anna's grin widened, sharp as glass. "Looks like big sister finally gets reality handed to her." My throat burned. This is my house. I rebuilt it with my own hands. Every brick, every board, every dollar came from me. Mom leaned forward, her voice low, like she was trying to soothe a child after bad news. "The deed is still in our names. We've had an offer. It's time we made practical decisions." Anna let out a laugh that sliced through me. "You thought sweat equity made you an owner. That's not how the world works." The chair scraped loudly as I pushed back, standing with my hands shaking. My heart pounded so hard I could barely hear over it. Ethan shifted in his seat but said nothing, his jaw tight. "So this is the gift you give me on New Year's Day," I said, my voice thin but steady. "My own family handing me an eviction notice in the middle of breakfast?" My mother reached out as if to touch my hand. "We'll help you with moving costs if you need it. You'll find another place." I stepped back quickly, her hand hovering in the air. "I don't need help. I need honesty. How long have you been planning this?" Anna shrugged, her silk blouse catching the morning light. 3 months. Michael knows investors who would love this lot. The neighborhood is hot. Why waste it on your sentimental project? Her words hit harder than the winter air outside. Michael Harper, of course. The boyfriend she flaunted at every holiday dinner. A real estate man with big talk and shiny shoes. I looked at my parents, waiting for them to deny it, to say this was some cruel joke. They stayed silent. My chest ached like something inside me had cracked. "Get out," I said, my voice low but firm. Claire, Mom began. I said out. The room stilled. Ethan set down his cup slowly, his eyes finally meeting mine, but he didn't move. One by one they stood. My mother clutched her purse as if it were a shield. My father's shoulders drooped. Anna smirked like she had already won. At the doorway she turned to me, her eyes gleaming. "You're fighting a battle you can't win. Don't let pride cloud your judgment." I opened the door wide, the bitter January wind rushing in. They stepped out, their footsteps crunching on the frozen ground. The door shut with a heavy sound that echoed through the house. I stood in the stillness, the paper heavy in my hand, my heart hollow. For a moment, I thought I might collapse right there on the old wooden floor. I had refinished one long summer night. Instead, I walked slowly to the armchair by the window, sat down and stared at the lavender garden beyond the frosted glass. The eviction notice lay across my lap like an open wound that wouldn't stop bleeding. Tears didn't come. Anger simmered beneath my ribs but didn't spill out. What filled me instead was a strange, sharp clarity. Anna thought she had struck the final blow. She thought my silence meant surrender. But as I traced the edge of the paper with my finger, the corner sharp against my skin, I felt the curve of my lips lift into a faint smile. She had no idea what I was capable of. And this was only the beginning. The next morning, sunlight pushed weakly through the frosted windows, casting pale strips across the floorboards I had sanded myself. My body felt heavy as I brewed coffee, the bitter smell filling the quiet kitchen. The eviction notice still lay on the counter, its sharp black letters impossible to ignore. My hands trembled as I set 2 mugs down. I knew I could not avoid facing them, not yet. When I walked into the living room, my parents were already there. Mom sat stiffly in her chair, her legs crossed, her hands folded tight in her lap. Dad stood by the window, his shoulders hunched, staring out at the street, like the answers were somewhere beyond the bare branches. Anna leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, smirking, as if the whole house was already hers. Ethan sat off to the side, fiddling with his phone, his jaw clenched. I placed the mugs on the coffee table, though nobody reached for them. My chest tightened, but I forced myself to speak. I put 5 years into this house. My savings, my weekends, every ounce of energy I had. You all knew that. Mom's eyes flicked toward me, and then back down, her voice quiet but firm. "Claire, we have to be realistic. This house is still legally in our names. The offer on the table could solve our problems." I felt the sting of betrayal in every syllable. Problems. That was the word she used to describe me, my work, my life here. Dad shifted uncomfortably but stayed silent. His silence had always been his way of avoiding conflict, but this time it felt like a knife. Anna laughed softly, brushing a strand of her dark hair behind her ear. "Exactly. You poured your energy into something that was never truly yours. Investors will pay top dollar. This place is a gold mine, and you are just clinging to nostalgia." Heat rose in my chest. Nostalgia. That was what she called the lavender garden. I planted with my own hands the nights I stayed up fixing plumbing so the pipes wouldn't burst in winter, the roof shingles I replaced in the July sun until my arms burned. I turned to Ethan, desperate for one voice of reason. "You know what I've done here. Say something." He glanced up, his eyes pained, but he only muttered, "I think we should talk about this later." The hollowness spread deeper. Later. Always later, until there was nothing left to save. I steadied myself, my voice breaking. "I am not moving out. This is my home." Mom rose slowly, her face strained with worry, her hand out as if she could calm me like a child. "Honey, please understand, we are under pressure. Anna has connections, she has a plan, and we cannot ignore the financial reality. Financial reality. The words rang cold. Anna smiled wider, sensing her victory. Maybe if you had made better choices, you would not be in this position. The slap of her voice stung more than if she had struck me. My teeth clenched, but I refused to let her see me cry. I stepped closer to my father. Dad, do you really believe this? After everything I have done, do you believe I should just pack my bags and walk away? He looked at me, then his eyes tired, guilt flickering in them, but no words came. He simply lowered his gaze, as if ashamed of the truth. The silence was worse than any answer. I felt the walls closing in every corner of this house I loved, turning strange under their eyes. I took a deep breath, my heart pounding. If this is how you see me, then there is nothing left to discuss. I picked up the eviction notice from the table and held it tightly in my hand. My voice was quiet but sharp. You can make your choices. I will make mine. I walked back toward the kitchen, my footsteps echoing on the wooden floor. Behind me, I heard Anna chuckle again, low and triumphant, and my mother whisper my name in a voice full of pleading. But I kept walking. The coffee on the counter had gone cold untouched. I leaned against the counter, staring out the small window at the frost-covered garden where dead lavender stalks stood like brittle reminders of summer. My chest ached, but my mind was strangely clear. I knew now that this battle was no longer about a house. It was about whether my voice meant anything in this family. And in that moment, I decided that silence would no longer protect me. I would find a way to fight even if I had to do it alone. That night, I sat at the kitchen table long after the house went quiet, staring at the paper still creased from my fist. The edges dug into my palm like a reminder of everything I was about to lose. I wanted to scream, but instead I reached for my phone. My fingers hovered for a moment before I found the number I had not dialed in months. When Megan's voice came through the lines, steady and warm, my throat tightened. "Claire, are you all right?" "No," I whispered, my eyes burning. "Can you come? Please." She did not hesitate. Less than an hour later, I saw her headlights through the front window cutting across the frozen driveway. I opened the door, and there she was, her coat dusted with snow, her dark hair loose around her shoulders, her familiar eyes scanning me quickly before she stepped in. She closed the door, and without a word pulled me into her arms. I held on longer than I meant to, like I was anchoring myself after days of drifting. Finally, I stepped back, wiping at my eyes. "It is worse than you think," I said, pushing the paper across the table toward her. She read it slowly, her brows drawing together, then let out a sharp breath. "Eviction notice. From your parents. On New Year's morning," I said, my voice hollow, and Anna laughed like she had been waiting for it. Megan sat down, her hand pressing the paper flat. "You put 5 years into this house. Your entire savings." I nodded, the words lodged in my throat. She straightened, her lawyer's mind already at work. "Legally, the deed is in their names. That gives them the power unless there is fraud. Did Anna show them any documents to push them into this?" I remembered my mother clutching a folder weeks earlier, her voice uneasy as she mentioned complaints from neighbors. "Yes. She waved papers at me once, said the city had received complaints that I was renovating without permits. She never let me see them." Megan's eyes sharpened. "That is where we start. If those papers are fake, this whole thing shifts." I blinked at her. "But how do we prove it?" Her mouth curved, determined. "Chloe Ramirez. She works at the county's land records office, still owes me a favor from law school days. If anyone can dig into building permits and complaints, it is her." Hearing her say it out loud felt like someone had lit a small candle in the dark. For the first time since yesterday morning, I could breathe a little easier. I poured coffee, and we sat there until steam clouded the air between us. I told her about Anna's smug smile, about Dad's silence, about Ethan's refusal to take a side. Megan listened, her hand occasionally resting over mine, steady and grounding. "Claire," she said softly, "I have known you since we were 20. You are stubborn as hell, and you have rebuilt this place with your bare hands. Do not let Anna take it with lies. I laughed weakly, tears stinging my eyes again. Stubborn, yes. Maybe that is all I have left. Sometimes stubborn is what saves us, she said. We fell quiet, the ticking clock loud in the kitchen. Outside, the snow had stopped, leaving the world washed in moonlight. When Megan finally stood to leave, she pulled her scarf tighter and looked at me firmly. Tomorrow we talk to Chloe. Let me handle the call. Get some sleep if you can. After she left, I sat by the front window, staring out at the streetlight, casting shadows across the lavender garden, now nothing but brittle stems. My heart was bruised, but something inside me felt steadier. I knew this was only the beginning, and I would not face it alone anymore. By the next afternoon, Megan and I were walking through the glass doors of the Franklin County Public Library, the place where Chloe had agreed to meet us. My stomach was tight the whole drive, my hands gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles went white. Megan kept telling me to breathe, that whatever we found out today was better than the silence I had been drowning in. Inside, the library smelled of paper and dust, and faint coffee drifting from the cafe in the corner. Chloe was already there, seated at a long wooden table with her laptop open and a heavy file balanced beside her. She stood when she saw us, her smile warm but her eyes sharp in a way that told me she was used to spotting details most people missed. "Claire," she said, her voice low, "it has been a long time. Megan told me enough to get me curious." I shook her hand, grateful that Megan had pulled the string for me. "Thank you for meeting us." We sat together and Chloe slid the file toward us. "I checked your property address in the county system." She turned the screen of her laptop so we could see the records. "Every permit you filed, every inspection, it is all here. Nothing is missing. All legitimate." My throat tightened. Then what did my mother see? She swore there were complaints from neighbors. Chloe flipped open the file and pulled out a photocopy she had managed to access from the clerk's intake desk. This is what was submitted. Supposedly, it is a petition from a neighbor about noise and unpermitted work. But there is no official case number. It was never entered into the database. I stared at the page. The name on the signature line did not match anyone who lived within blocks of Willow Street. I knew the neighbors by heart, every family, every retiree, every young couple fixing up a starter home. This person did not exist, so it is fake, I said, my voice shaking. Exactly, Chloe replied. It was fabricated to look official, but legally it has no standing. Megan leaned closer, her lawyer's mind racing. If Anna handed this to your parents and told them it was real, that is fraud, it changes everything. I pressed my hands flat on the table to steady myself. Rage and relief tangled inside me until I could hardly breathe. My own sister had forged documents to trick our parents to make me look like a criminal in my own home. Chloe tapped the screen again. There is something else. At the last city planning meeting, a file circulated under early proposals for redevelopment. She clicked and an image of a sleek blueprint filled the screen. Harper Real Estate Group. Proposed luxury apartments. Location listed right on Willow Street. The blood drained from my face. They are already planning to tear my house down. Megan's lips pressed into a thin line. Michael Harper. That is Anna's boyfriend, right? I nodded, bile rising in my throat. Of course it was him. He must have been whispering in her ear for months, promising her money, promising her status. Chloe closed the file with a decisive snap. I should not even have shown you this, but I could not keep quiet. What they are doing stinks, and it is not the first time Harper Real Estate has played dirty. I wanted to ask more, but my voice caught. The room felt too bright, too loud, the blueprint burned into my mind. Megan packed the papers back into her briefcase and thanked Chloe, promising to be careful with what we had learned. Outside the library, the cold air slapped against my cheeks, grounding me again. The sky was the color of steel, heavy with clouds that threatened more snow. Megan turned to me, her eyes steady. We have proof the complaint was fake. That is the first crack. Next we find the rest. I gripped the strap of my bag, my fingers still numb. For years I believed hard work and honesty were enough. I never imagined I would be fighting my own blood with forged papers and secret deals. As we walked back to the car, I looked down the busy street, where families carried grocery bags and children tugged on mittened hands. For them, it was an ordinary afternoon. For me, it was the moment I realized my sister was willing to erase me from the home I had built, and she already had help. I slid into the driver's seat, my breath fogging the windshield, and whispered under my breath that she had just made the worst mistake of her life. 2 days later, I sat in a corner booth at Cornerstone Cafe, my hands wrapped tightly around a mug of tea, though I had barely taken a sip. The place smelled of fresh pastries and roasted beans, a comfort I could not quite absorb. My stomach twisted with nerves as I waited for Ethan. I kept wondering if he would even show up, or if Anna had already poisoned him against me completely. The bell over the door jingled, and there he was, taller than I remembered, his coat still dusted with snow. His eyes looked tired, like he had not been sleeping well. He slid into the seat across from me and gave a faint nod. I did not waste time. "You knew about the eviction, didn't you?" He looked down at his hands, rubbing the edge of his wedding ring with his thumb. "Yeah, about 2 weeks ago. I felt my pulse race, and you said nothing to me." He shifted uncomfortably. "Anna told Mom and Dad that you were risking the house, that the city might fine you because you worked without permits. She said investors were circling and it was safer to cut losses before it turned into a mess." I pulled Megan's folder from my bag and pushed it across the table. "Here. Every permit, every inspection, every stamp of approval. All legal. Look at it." He hesitated, then flipped open the folder. His eyes scanned page after page, the color draining from his face. He swallowed hard, then looked up. "These are real." "Of course they are," I said sharply. "I kept everything. I followed the rules, and she lied to you." He leaned back, his jaw tight, his voice low. "Then she lied to all of us." I stared at him, my heart aching. Why would you believe her so easily? He met my eyes for the first time. Because she sounded so certain. And because Mom and Dad wanted to believe her. "They are drowning in debt, Claire. The mortgage, the medical bills. Michael promised Anna he would fix everything if they agreed to sell." The name made my skin crawl. Michael Harper. "He is not fixing anything. He is buying my house for pennies and flipping it into a luxury project." Ethan frowned. "He is in real estate. Dad mentioned his company once, Harper Real Estate Group." "Exactly," I said. "Megan and I found blueprints at the planning office. They already listed my address." He shook his head slowly, as if trying to wake up from a bad dream. "I should have asked more questions. I just wanted to keep the peace." My voice softened but carried steel beneath it. "Keeping the peace by siding with lies is not peace, Ethan. It is betrayal." He winced, and for a long moment, neither of us spoke. The cafe buzzed with life around us, the hiss of the espresso machine, the laughter of college students in the corner, but between us, there was only heavy silence. Finally, he leaned forward. "What do you need from me?" I blinked at him, unsure if I had heard right. He repeated clearer this time. "What do you need me to do?" I let out a breath I had been holding since the night of New Year's. "I need you to stand with me when the time comes. I need you to help me show Mom and Dad the truth." He nodded slowly, the weight of his guilt visible. "I will, better late than never." Relief loosened something inside me, though it was tangled with anger that it had taken this long. I gathered the folder, tucking it back into my bag. "We are up against more than Anna. This is Michael's plan, and he will not hesitate to crush anyone in his way." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "Then we need to dig deeper. If there are more lies, we find them." I looked at him across the table, at my brother, who had chosen silence for too long. For the first time in years, I saw a flicker of the boy who once stood up for me on the schoolyard when no one else did. Maybe I was not alone anymore. When we stepped out into the cold, the sky was pale gray, the air biting at our cheeks. Ethan walked beside me to the car, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. "Stay careful," he said quietly. "Anna is not playing fair." I met his eyes, my breath rising in white puffs. "Neither am I." I slid behind the wheel, started the engine, and pulled away the tires, crunching over the salted street. For the first time since the eviction notice had landed in my lap, I felt a spark of strength return. But deep down, I knew this was only the surface. There were more lies waiting, and Anna and Michael were just getting started. The morning after meeting Ethan, I walked outside to find shards of glass glittering across the driveway like ice. My stomach dropped when I saw the front windshield of my car smashed inward, the steering wheel littered with fragments. On the passenger seat sat a rock, heavy and jagged with a scrap of paper taped to it. My hands shook as I pulled it free. The words scrawled in thick black marker read, "Back off before it is too late." For a long moment I stood frozen, the cold air burning my lungs. My ears rang as if the world had gone silent around me. This was no longer just family betrayal. Someone wanted to scare me into giving up. I called the police, my voice tight as I explained what I had found. Within minutes, a patrol car pulled up, lights flashing against the snow. An officer with kind eyes took my statement, photographed the car, and collected the rock and note. He advised me to install cameras and to let them know immediately if anything else happened. I nodded, numbly grateful for his professionalism, yet unsettled by the fact that now even the police were involved. After they left, I sat on the front steps, my arms wrapped around myself against the wind. Fear pressed in, but beneath it was anger, hotter than anything I had felt before. Whoever had done this thought I would run. They thought I would crumble. By evening, Megan came over, her face tight with concern, as she examined the broken glass still scattered around the car. "This is Escalation," she said quietly. "Michael has a history of pushing people, Claire. He has money lawyers and people who will do his dirty work." I clenched my fists. "Then let him come. I am not backing down." Megan placed a hand on my shoulder. "Courage is good, but caution is better. Promise me you will keep records of everything. Dates, times, photos." I nodded, already pulling out a notebook to write down every detail. Later that night, as the wind rattled the windows, my phone buzzed on the counter. A text from an unknown number lit the screen. "Stop digging. You do not know who you are up against." My breath caught my hands cold as I stared at the words. It was not just vandalism. They were watching me. I forwarded the message to Megan, who called immediately. Her voice was steady but firm. "This is intimidation. Save it. I will make sure it is logged." I thanked her, though my voice shook, and after we hung up, I locked every door and window in the house. The lavender garden outside was buried under frost, the stems stark against the snow. I pressed my hand to the cold glass of the window, feeling the weight of isolation press down on me. The next morning, as I shoveled glass into a trash bag, Mrs. Collins from next door walked over, bundled in her long wool coat. She leaned on her cane and looked at the car with a frown. "I saw someone last night," she said softly. "Tall man wearing a hood standing by your driveway. I thought maybe it was Ethan stopping by." "It was not Ethan," I whispered. She patted my arm gently. "Be careful, Claire." Her warning lingered long after she went back inside. By afternoon, Ethan came over, his face pale when he saw the car. "You should stay with me and Lauren for a while," he said quickly. "It is not safe here." I shook my head firmly. "If I leave, I prove them right. I will not abandon this house." He sighed, rubbing his temples, but did not argue further. Instead, he helped me sweep up the last of the glass and tape a tarp across the windshield until I could get it replaced. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with my notes spread out in front of me. Dates, threats, vandalism. Piece by piece, the evidence was building. My fear remained, but so did the clarity I had felt since that New Year's morning. They wanted me gone, but I was still here, and I would not stop until I knew every truth they were trying so hard to bury. Megan called the next day and told me she had tracked down a copy of the land survey my parents supposedly signed. I drove to her office downtown, my stomach knotted the whole way. Her desk was stacked with case files, but right on top sat the thin folder with my address typed neatly across the header. She slid the pages toward me. "Look at this, Claire." I leaned in, my eyes scanning the document. There were my parents' signatures at the bottom, stiff and careful as they always signed anything important. Above them was a notary seal stamped in red ink. My heart stuttered as I read the name, Elizabeth Sterling Notary Public. That name jolted me like an electric shock. Elizabeth Sterling was Anna's mother. Not our mother, but her mother from before Dad married Mom. She had been a notary years ago, I remembered that. But she had retired long before. I looked up at Megan, my pulse racing. She cannot notarize anything. She retired. Exactly, Megan said, her voice low, but urgent. She has not held a license since 2021. This document is dated just last month. Heat burned through me, my hands shaking as I gripped the edge of the desk. They used a retired notary to stamp a fraudulent land survey and trick my parents into believing it was legitimate. Megan nodded grimly. This alone could qualify as document fraud. But it gets worse. I asked a colleague to check into Harper Real Estate's records. There are sealed settlements from lawsuits 2 years ago. Tenants and homeowners accused them of falsifying appraisals and pushing through deals without proper consent. They paid to keep it quiet. The room seemed to tilt. My sister had tied herself to a man and a company already known for corruption, and now they were using our family to fuel their next project. I pressed my palm to my forehead, fighting the rush of nausea. My parents signed this, Megan. They believed it was real. She reached across the desk and squeezed my hand. They were deceived, Claire. They trusted Anna because they never imagined she would forge her own mother's seal. I could barely find my voice. How do we prove it in court? Megan leaned back, her lawyer's face sharpening. We have to collect every piece. Certified proof that Elizabeth's license expired. Expert analysis confirming the stamp was reused illegally. And most importantly, tie it to Anna and Michael. I swallowed hard, the weight of it pressing on me. The thought of standing across from my sister in a courtroom felt surreal, but the evidence in front of me left no other path. When I left Megan's office, the city streets buzzed with the usual afternoon traffic. People hurried past with shopping bags, bundled against the cold, their lives intact and ordinary. I walked slowly toward my car, the folder clutched to my chest. For them, it was just another Tuesday. For me, it was the day I realized my sister was not just betraying me, she was breaking the law. At home, I spread the documents across the kitchen table, the same place where my parents had once laughed and celebrated birthdays. Now it looked like a crime scene. I stared at the red seal. So official at first glance, so damning now that I knew the truth. Anger pulsed through me, but beneath it was something sharper, determination. Anna had dragged this into dangerous territory, and she thought no one would notice. She thought her smile and Michael's money would keep everyone quiet. But I was not quiet anymore. I picked up my phone and called Ethan. When he answered, I did not give him time for pleasantries. The land survey Mom and Dad signed is a fake. The notary is Elizabeth. She retired 2 years ago. There was silence on the line, then a sharp exhale. Anna used her own mother's seal. Yes, I said. And Harper Real Estate has already been sued for shady deals before. Ethan muttered a curse under his breath. I cannot believe she would go this far. Believe it, I said flatly. She is in it deep, and we are going to prove it. For the first time I heard something new in his voice. Resolve. Tell me what to do. I looked at the papers scattered around me, my jaw tightening. We build a case brick by brick until she cannot deny it. The house creaked softly in the evening, wind its old bones steady even as my family fractured. I touched the edge of the survey one more time, feeling the weight of everything I stood to lose. Anna had made her move, and now I knew exactly how far she was willing to go. 2 evenings later, I was sitting in the living room with a pile of papers spread across the coffee table when my phone buzzed. The message came from a number I did not recognize. I know what Anna and Michael have done. Meet me tomorrow at 5 Bean and Birch Cafe. Come alone. I read it 3 times, my pulse thudding in my ears. For a moment I wondered if it was a trap, just another way to scare me. But something about the wording felt different. It was not a threat, it was an opening. The next afternoon I pulled into the parking lot of the little cafe tucked between a florist and a laundromat on High Street. The smell of roasted beans drifted out the door as I stepped inside, shaking the snow from my coat. My eyes scanned the tables until I saw her. Lena Harper sat in the far corner, her charcoal gray coat buttoned up tight, her dark hair pulled into a simple knot. She was younger than Michael, mid-20s, at most, her posture rigid, as if she had been carrying a secret too heavy for too long. She gestured for me to sit. I slid into the chair opposite her, my heart pounding. "Why did you ask me here?" She looked me straight in the eye. "Because I cannot watch my brother and Anna ruin more lives." Her voice trembled slightly, but her words were firm. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small USB drive, setting it between us on the table. "This has emails, project files, blueprints. Proof of everything." I stared at it, unable to breathe for a moment. Proof. That single word carried more weight than I could hold. Lena continued, her voice low. "They are calling the project Willow Heights. Your address is listed in every plan. They forged surveys, pressured your parents, and bragged that once the engagement party is over, no one will be able to stop them." My throat went dry. "Why are you giving this to me?" She hesitated, then her eyes softened with something like shame. "I believed in Michael once. I thought he was building something real. But all he cares about is money and image. He and Anna feed off each other. If I stay quiet, I am complicit." I closed my fingers around the USB, the plastic cool against my skin. "Thank you, Lena. This means more than you know." She shook her head. "There is more." She slid a folded packet of paper across the table. "I was asked to prepare backup invitations for the engagement party. Media contacts, investors, potential partners. You are not on the list." A bitter laugh escaped me. "Of course I am not." Her lips pressed tight. "But I kept one invitation blank. If you want to get inside, use it." I stared at the paper, the edges trembling in my hands. I could already picture Anna in her white dress, Michael parading her in front of everyone, smiling like they had already won, and me walking in with the truth ready to explode their perfect facade. I looked back at Lena. "Why are you really helping me?" She hesitated, then answered softly. "Because I do not want to see my family dragged deeper into this, and because what they are doing to you is wrong." For the first time in days, I felt something shift, hope fragile but fierce. We sat in silence for a few moments, the sounds of the cafe surrounding us, the hiss of the espresso machine, the hum of quiet conversation. I tucked the USB and invitation safely into my bag, my mind already racing. When I finally rose to leave, Lena caught my arm. "Be careful. They are desperate now. Desperate people make dangerous choices." I nodded, my throat too tight for words. Outside, the sky was turning dusky purple, the streetlights flickering on. I stood by my car for a moment, the cold biting my cheeks, staring at the snow piled against the curb. The drive in my pocket felt heavier than stone. Inside my chest, something steadied. I was no longer just defending myself. I was carrying the truth, and soon the whole room would see it. 2 days after meeting Lena, my mother called and asked me to come by the house. Her voice on the phone was gentle, almost pleading, and against my better judgment, I went. The old maple tree in the front yard was bare and skeletal, its branches scratching the gray sky as I walked up the steps. Inside, the living room smelled faintly of Dad's aftershave and the lemon polish Mom always used on the wood furniture. For a moment, it almost felt like home again, until I saw Anna sitting proudly in Dad's chair, her legs crossed, her eyes glittering with that cruel satisfaction she never bothered to hide anymore. Mom stood near the fireplace, her hands clasped tight, while Dad sat on the couch staring down at the floor. They looked older than they had just weeks ago, weighed down by something more than the winter. Mom spoke first. "Claire, we need to talk about this fighting. It has to stop." I folded my arms, steadying myself. "Stop means what exactly? That I should pack up and disappear?" Her lips trembled. "We are drowning, honey. The bank is calling every week. The medical bills are stacked in drawers." Michael told us if the sale goes through, he will cover everything. My chest tightened, the betrayal pressing down like a stone. So you are willing to sacrifice me to save yourselves? Dad finally looked up, his eyes glassy with guilt. It is not like that. We need relief. Relief, I repeated bitterly. Relief for you, ruin for me. Anna leaned forward in the chair, her smile sharp. You act like you are the only one who has worked hard. You are clinging to an old wooden box that is falling apart. Michael is offering a future. I am offering stability. I met her gaze, unflinching. You are offering fraud and greed. Her smile faltered for just a second, but she recovered quickly. Say whatever you like. In the end, the contracts are signed. The investors are waiting, and you are the one holding on to ghosts. I could feel my hands trembling, not from fear, but from fury. Every memory in that house, every hour I had spent sanding floors, painting walls, tending lavender in the summer heat, she dismissed with a laugh. Mom took a step closer, her voice breaking. Please, Claire. Think of the family. Think of what this means for all of us. I looked at her, my eyes burning. I have been thinking of this family for years. Every dollar I poured into that house, every hour of labor, every sacrifice, it was all for this family. And you stand here telling me my work means nothing compared to Michael's promises. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. Anna rose from the chair and walked toward me, her heels clicking on the hardwood. She stopped only a foot away, her chin tilted high. You are not strong enough to win, and when you finally fall, no one will be there to catch you. I leaned in close enough to see the faint smear of lipstick at the corner of her mouth. That may be true, but when you fall, it will be because of your own lies. For the first time, her eyes flickered with something like doubt, but she quickly masked it with disdain. I turned to my parents, my voice shaking with both pain and resolve. If you choose to believe her, I cannot stop you. But do not ever say you did not know. Without waiting for an answer, I walked to the door. My mother called my name once, her voice raw, but I did not turn back. Outside, the cold wind cut across my face, sharp and bracing. I stood on the porch for a long moment, breathing hard, letting the furies settle into something steadier. I knew then that the line had been drawn. Anna had my parents in her grip, and she would not stop until I was erased from the picture entirely. But I was not planning on stepping aside. Not now, not ever. That evening, I gathered everything I had collected and spread it across Megan's dining room table. Ethan sat across from me, with his arms folded tight, his expression grim, while Lena hovered near the window, her face pale but determined. Megan flipped through each page, marking sections with sticky notes, while Sarah Holden, the attorney Megan had called in, studied the documents with a sharp eye. Sarah tapped the land survey first. This one is the cornerstone. Retired notary, falsified stamp, forged signatures. If a judge sees this, it is evidence of fraud. She moved to the printed emails from the USB Lena had given me. These are damning. Discussions about suppressing records, manipulating your parents, even mentioning your address directly. I clenched my fists against the edge of the table. They thought they were invincible. Ethan's voice was rough-laced with regret. I let myself believe them. I let her convince me you were reckless. I looked at him. What matters is that you see the truth now. We need to focus on what comes next. Megan nodded firmly. The engagement party is in less than 2 weeks. They are going to present themselves in front of investors' friends, the press. If we drop this evidence, then there will be no way to contain it. Lena turned from the window, her voice quiet but steady. The guest list is stacked with people Michael needs to impress. Once they see what he has been hiding, they will turn on him. Sarah folded her hands. But you need to understand, public exposure comes with risk. They will try to paint you as bitter, unstable, vindictive. I leaned forward, my eyes locked on hers. They have already painted me as all of that. What I have now is proof. For a moment, the room was silent, the weight of my words settling on all of us. Then Sarah spoke again, her voice low. If you are going through with this, we need backups. Digital copies stored safely, evidence filed with trusted contacts. If something happens, the truth cannot be buried. Megan reached into her bag and pulled out 2 extra drives. I have already duplicated everything. One goes to the city legal office tomorrow, one stays locked in my office. Ethan exhaled slowly, running a hand over his face. This is real. This is going to blow up everything. I met his eyes. That is the point. The clock ticked past midnight by the time we packed the files away. Lena lingered by the door as the others prepared to leave. She looked at me with a mixture of fear and admiration. Anna is going to hate me for this. I shook my head softly. She made her choices. You are making yours. Her lips curved into a sad smile. I just hope the truth is enough. After everyone left, I sat in my car for a long time before driving home. The streets were empty snow piled against the sidewalk's streetlights, casting long shadows. My body ached with exhaustion, but my mind would not stop. When I pulled into my driveway, I noticed an envelope tucked under the windshield wiper of the replacement rental car I was using. My heart lurched as I snatched it free. Inside was a single sheet of paper, the handwriting rushed and uneven. If you expose us, you will lose everything. Think carefully. I stood there in the cold, the wind cutting at my face, the paper trembling in my hands. For a flicker of a second, fear tried to root itself again. But then I crumpled the note in my fist. They wanted me to be silent, to retreat into shame. Instead, their threats only confirmed that I was hitting the mark. I locked the doors behind me, set the alarm, and sat down at the kitchen table. The lavender garden outside was hidden under snow, but I pictured it in bloom, steady and bright, the way it would be again when summer came. My path was set. The engagement party would not be their victory. It would be the night the truth finally saw the light. The Bellevue Grand glittered with crystal chandeliers and polished marble floors, the kind of place where people came to pretend their lives were flawless. I stepped through the revolving doors in a simple black dress. My grandmother's pearl necklace cool against my skin. The invitation Lena had slipped me folded tightly in my clutch. The air was thick with perfume and champagne laughter rising above the soft hum of a string quartet. Across the ballroom I saw her. Anna, draped in a white gown that shimmered beneath the lights, her arm looped proudly through Michael's. They looked like they had been cut out of a glossy magazine, spread smiling, shaking hands, the center of attention. When her eyes met mine across the crowd, her smile faltered just for a second, then returned sharper than before. I walked past tables laden with hors d'oeuvres, past investors I recognized from city meetings, past reporters already scribbling notes. The stage had been set for Anna's triumph. Tonight was supposed to be her coronation. Instead, it would be her reckoning. When the servers began ushering guests to their seats for speeches, I picked up a glass of wine and moved toward the stage. My heart pounded so hard it felt like the chandelier above was shaking with it. I raised the glass and tapped it lightly with a spoon. The clear sound cut through the chatter until the room stilled, and all eyes turned toward me. If I may have a moment, I said, my voice steady, though my hands trembled. I promise, this is not a toast. It is the truth, and I believe everyone in this room deserves to hear it. A murmur swept through the crowd. Anna's eyes narrowed, Michael's jaw clenched. I reached into my clutch and pulled out the small USB Megan had prepared. With practiced calm, I crossed to the projector at the side of the stage and slipped it in. The screen behind me flickered to life. The first image was a blueprint stamped Willow Heights Luxury Residences, the address clear and bold. My house, my street, my home, gasps echoed across the ballroom. This is the property my family has lived in for over 5 years, I said clearly. It is listed here as the site of a new luxury apartment complex. No consent was given, no legal sale has occurred. The next image filled the screen, the land survey, with my parents' forged signatures and the notary seal of Elizabeth Sterling. Every signature, every stamp on this survey is fraudulent, I continued. Elizabeth Sterling has been retired since 2021, yet here she is notarizing a survey last month. This is not just a mistake. This is a crime. One of the investors in the front row shifted uncomfortably, his face pale. I clicked again, and the screen filled with excerpts of emails printed in black and white. Michael's words. Anna's words. Plans to suppress records, manipulate my parents, hurling around my name like I was an obstacle to bulldoze. Anna shot to her feet. Enough, Claire. You are humiliating yourself. I met her glare head on. I am not humiliating myself. I am showing everyone who you really are. Michael stepped forward, his arm around her, trying to control the moment. These are private family matters, he said smoothly, his politician's smile aimed at the crowd. Nothing illegal has occurred. That was when the audio file began to play. Their voices filled the ballroom, Anna's cold and deliberate. Let them think Claire broke the law. Once the house loses protection, we can buy it for almost nothing. After the engagement party, it will all be ours. Michael's voice followed, smug and confident. I cleaned out the files. No one will trace it back. The silence that followed was deafening. Then whispers rose, sharp and angry. Investors pushed back from their chairs, some standing, some grabbing their coats. A man I recognized from the planning office shook his head in disgust. Anna's face drained of color. She turned to Michael, who looked suddenly less polished, sweat gleaming at his temple. From the back of the room, Lena stepped forward, her voice ringing clear. I gave her the emails. I will not let my brother and Anna drag us through the mud. Gasps rippled again, all eyes shifting to Michael, and then back to me. Two men in plain suits moved through the crowd. Police officers. One stepped to Anna, his tone firm. Miss Sterling, you are under investigation for forgery and conspiracy to commit fraud. We ask for your cooperation. Anna's eyes darted wildly, her hands shaking as she pulled against Michael. This is ridiculous. She is lying. I stood steady, the weight of months of fear and anger lifting from my shoulders. You can deny me, Anna, but you cannot deny evidence. Michael tried to protest, but investors were already walking away from him, muttering about credibility, shaking their heads. One man slammed a folder onto the table and stormed out. The facade had cracked wide open. I stepped down from the stage, my body trembling but my heart unshakable. As I passed Anna, she spat, her voice low and venomous. You will regret this, Claire. I leaned close enough for only her to hear. No, Anna, you will. Then I walked on, leaving her surrounded by police and flashing cameras, the room buzzing with outrage and disbelief. Outside the hotel, the winter air hit me like a wave, cold but clean. I lifted my face to the night sky, the snow beginning to fall in soft flakes, each one catching in the light. For the first time in weeks, I felt the tight band around my chest loosen. The truth was out. The battle was not over, but their empire of lies had finally begun to crumble. Weeks after that night at the Bellevue Grand, the dust finally began to settle. The papers ran stories about Harper Real Estate losing investors, and Michael's name was whispered in the same sentences as fraud and scandal. Anna tried to keep her head high in court, but the evidence was stacked against her. She pled guilty to document forgery and conspiracy and walked away with a suspended sentence, her reputation in ruins. For my parents, the aftermath was harder to bear. They had believed her for so long, trusted her smooth words and Michael's promises. When the truth was laid out, the shame nearly broke them. My mother came to the house one quiet morning, her face pale and her eyes swollen from crying. She stood in the doorway holding a small wooden box that had belonged to my grandmother. She pressed it into my hands. Your grandmother used to say this house held the heart of our family. I forgot that. I let fear and desperation blind me. I opened the box, and inside was a worn wooden comb, the one my grandmother used to brush my hair when I was little. The sight of it nearly undid me. I took a breath and set it gently on the mantel. I forgave her not with words, but with the way I welcomed her inside. Some wounds take time, but the first step is opening the door. Dad followed a week later, helping Ethan mend the front fence that had been leaning since last summer. He barely spoke at first, just hammered nails into the wood. But at the end of the day, he sat on the porch beside me and said softly, "I was wrong, Claire. I should have stood up for you." I placed my hand over his, and for once he did not pull away. Ethan became my steady ally. Every weekend he brought his kids over their laughter, filling the backyard while we painted the shutters and replanted the lavender. He told them stories about how Aunt Claire saved the family house, and for the first time in years, I saw pride in his eyes when he looked at me. Lena stayed in touch too. She walked away from her brother's company and helped start a preservation fund with a group of community activists. One spring afternoon she arrived with a bronze plaque. Together we mounted it by the front gate. It read Mitchell House, a living legacy of Willow Street. The sight of it glinting in the sunlight made my throat tighten. My house was no longer just a home. It was recognized as part of the community protected for years to come. Even Michael showed up one day, though not in a suit and not with the arrogance he once carried. He stood at the edge of the driveway, his hands shoved in his pockets. "I know sorry does not undo what I did," he said quietly. "But I want to help fund Lena's preservation work. It is the least I can do." I looked at him for a long moment, the memories of broken glass and threatening notes flashing through my mind. Finally I nodded. Not because I forgave him, but because sometimes giving someone a chance to start again is better than letting bitterness eat you alive. By summer, the lavender bloomed brighter than ever, filling the air with its calming scent. The house stood stronger, not because of the nails and boards, but because of the people who now filled it with honesty and care. One evening, I hosted a small gathering in the backyard. String lights glowed overhead, neighbors brought dishes to share, and children darted through the rows of lavender while laughter echoed across the yard. Lena hung a framed photograph of my grandmother from the cherry tree, her smile radiant in the black and white picture. Ethan raised a glass and said simply, "To Claire, who saved more than a house. She saved us from forgetting what matters." I clinked glasses with those around me, my heart swelling. The house that was once at the center of betrayal had become a place of renewal, not just for me, but for everyone who stepped inside. Later that night, when the guests had gone and the yard was quiet, I sat on the porch steps with a blanket wrapped around my shoulders. The summer breeze carried the scent of lavender, and I looked around at every brick, every window, every corner I had fought so hard to keep. I realized then that I had not only reclaimed my home, I had reclaimed myself. Stronger, wiser, and unafraid of losing anything ever again. What do you think of Claire's journey and everything she had to endure? Share your thoughts in the comments. Let me know if you would have fought the same way, and subscribe if you want to hear more stories about family justice and the strength we find when we refuse to give up.